Welcome to the fifth mini-webinar presented by Searchlight and IHRS to the members of MGAA. I'm Holly Mapstone, and today we're going to be talking about inclusive communications, elevating your management through inclusive communications. Today's learning objectives are, by the end of the session, you will be able to summarize your diverse audience and learn the difference between the different audiences and the unique backgrounds, perspectives, and the needs of the workforce that you'll be dealing with. Explain methods you can use to create inclusive communications, and this will allow you to discover effective strategies and communication techniques that promote ED&I and collaboration. And then describe the impact your working style has on your communication. You'll be able to then outline how inclusive communication can evolve your working style. Okay, so let's explore some statistics. So 75% of communications received are interpreted incorrectly. And when you think about that, that is actually, a really kind of astonishing statistic, because a lot of our communication is related to professional and business discussions and key decisions, and even just general cultural changes and discussions. And if you actually think if 75% of those are received interpreted incorrectly, then that's a huge issue and risk that we've got within our working relationship and professional world. And then, so how does this impact you and your team that you're working with? So 80% of the people believe that their business communicates poorly. And just take a minute there just to think about your own team, what your relationship's like with your supervisor, your leader, your management, your senior leadership team, and think about the levels of communication that you have. And we'll be able to explore this in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides. But again, really shocking statistics, but unfortunately in the world of ED&I, not unsurprising. Okay, so what does that mean for you and your team? So the challenges with communication are, we really need to try to create a common goal, whether that's a group-wide goal within the business, really headline strategic goals that you can kind of connect with, or whether that's more granular common goals such as department goals, team goals, monthly common goals. But communication can really impact you in terms of creating that collaboration. It can also enable each other to work at their best. So the challenges that you face is when actually communication isn't clear and concise and inclusive, actually the ability to collaborate and work as cohesively as a team is actually impacted. And then thirdly, ensuring that fair treatments for all. So again, when we look at how inclusive our comms are, if it's not the best it can be, then that could then potentially affect the fair treatment that you're giving and receiving your teammates. Okay, so where do we start? Where do we want to go from here in regards to when we've looked at those shocking statistics? Okay, so this really isn't earth-shattering, revelationary things. Everybody is different. When it comes to communication, we assume that everybody does talk like us, though. We like to think that when we present something or we talk about something, we're presenting it in a good way, and this comes across and we engage with people. But actually, what we fail to do is realize that everybody likes to receive information differently and process it differently. And so, whilst it's glaringly obvious that everybody's different, we naturally try to go into our own preferences when we're doing communication and actually not think about the wider audience that we're dealing with. And that can then impact and influence how inclusive that communication is. And why do we care? Why is this important? Why are you taking the time to listen to the webinar and continue on your CPD journey? So inclusive communications can increase team cohesion. It can create a better understanding, obviously. We've seen the statistics at the start. If we can kind of reduce those, then obviously the would reduce the lack of misinterpretation. So clear understanding is a definite positive. Better working relationships, which we all want. Improved reputation, so that's externally and internally. And then overall greater appeal. So being able to just adapt our communication style to the wider audience and become more inclusive will, again, give us a greater appeal. Okay, so broad appeal. Let's think about this. When we're communicating, actually, it's really rare that we're just communicating with just one person on a one-to-one basis. Mostly we're emailing multiple peoples, having discussions with our teammates and departments, giving discussions on maybe ideas or projects. You might be putting up ideas on a website that will be obviously seen by hundreds of thousands of people, posting on social media. You might have Teams or Slack groups where you've got instant chat again with multiple people in. So it is really rare that we're actually ever just talking to just one person these days. And actually, words are the smallest part. So 93% of communication is non-verbal. And you know, 38% of it is vocal and 55% of it is actually visual. So we really need to think about it's actually not always what we say. Words are actually the smallest part of it, and actually everything else goes along with that can build up a really inclusive picture of how we communicate. The amazing Maya Angelou said that I learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will not forget how you made them feel. And that really resonates with me. So when we communicate, when you're speaking to somebody, for example, the 93% of your information received is nonverbal. We all remember those times when actually maybe a difficult situation's been dealt with or a challenging conversation's been had, but actually if that person's dealt with it and considered your feelings and had empathy, and made you feel okay, then you will remember that emotional state that you were in rather than the words that someone was saying. So take a second now just to reflect on that, because I think everybody has a situation in their mind that would stick out, that you can definitely resonate with that quote. Okay, so when we look at different personality types, we've got introvert, extrovert, agreeableness, conscientious, open to experience, emotional stability. These are our five big traits that most psychologists believe that you kind of are within one category. Again, think about your personality types, think about what your preferences are, and also then think about your audience in which you're dealing with. There could be multiple people with different personality types, which is then what brings in the consideration to make it inclusive. And then alongside the personality types, we've got processing styles. So you've got, do people like to read material or do they like audio information? Do they like quite a lot of detail and, papers and details before maybe going into a meeting? Or do they just like the highlights and the bullet points and maybe an agenda? Do people like to have words, images, or sounds? Are you more of an understanding and understanding the context and the theory, or are you more of a practical and doing person when processing? And then people like to be thinking about ideas before they go into discussions, and some people just like to go straight into discussions and have that really creative flow. Everybody's completely different, as we said at the start, and everyone will be a blend. So again, just things to consider when we're thinking about the broader appeal. And knowing yourself is key. So really just, take a second to explore yourself in terms of understanding your own personality types and your processing styles, and have a conversation with your wider team to understand that. There's a couple on the screen here of psychometric assessments that we would recommend. Again, not affiliated, but really great ones to try to figure out how you like to learn. And here, this is a really interesting one. This is the DISC model, but again, they use colours as part of the assessment to be able to identify people in terms of their cognitive processing style. So again, thinking of that, is that something that you could maybe try to raise with your management team in terms of getting just a better understanding of different people, because then it will be allow you to alter your techniques and your methods to each audience. This is a slide essentially introducing people to neurolinguistic programming. Again, I don't know whether anyone's ever heard of that, but it's a really interesting concept, so I would highly recommend looking into that if it's a topic that interests you. But essentially, it talks about most of your decisions are unconscious, so your inner thoughts, and your thoughts actually control your behavior, which then controls your actions, which then controls your reality. And it's in this kind of process but everybody does it. And if you can kind of program your mind to talk to yourself more inclusive yourself, then it's proven that actually your behavior, your outcomes, and your actions become much more inclusive. So really just interesting topic there. I would really recommend looking at NLP. It's used quite a lot for sales techniques. So just kind of a really good all-round tool if you want to push some CPD in your teams. And then we've got to look at different perspectives. So, the demographics and the identities that you've got within your teams and your audiences. You might have people within your business with neurodivergent, with neurodiversity conditions. You've got social economic factors to consider, geographical things. We're all working in hybrid and siloed working. So you might have different people from all different types of the country with different socioeconomic backgrounds. And then again, different lifestyles and experiences that people have gone through that completely create a different perspective to everybody else. So again, all these factors take into account how people perceive information. So let's identify the methods in which you would use communications. So some options, obviously, we've got face-to-face, which, post-COVID might be slightly more limited now. Phone calls, I would say, we still use, but maybe, when people are driving or trying to get kind of quick results. Video calls, that we've seen obviously a massive uptick in Zoom and Teams since the pandemic. Again, though, we've seen that 93% of it's not words and not verbal. So over that video call, can we really get a feel for people's body language and their eye contact? I think video calls can be a massive issue actually in inclusive communications. We've got email, again, probably overused a lot in businesses, but that's the options. Instant messages, like we said before, you've got your Teams, you've got your Slack. Any other forms of instant messaging, again, people want quick responses. It's a lot of processing. Social media content, you've got you might have some people having responsibilities to post on social media, and then written content such as blogs, etc., for maybe websites, and content for publishing, etc. So these are some of the options that we've got in terms of methods for communication. So it's a wide variety. And then when we think about using your words, we really need to think about the language that we're using, the voice, in which, our tone, and also our body language. Again, just remembering that actually 93% of it's non-verbal. So we really just need to be mindful of the words, our tone, and our body language when remaining eye contact at all times. When we're having meetings, I guess a couple of questions just to pose to you to take away with you today is, how do you share that information? Again, thinking about personality types, processing styles, which we've just talked about. How could you edit how you share information before that meeting? Could you do it in a variety of ways to make sure that everybody's got different access to different information so that it's suitable to different processing styles? Could you edit the format of the meeting so that it's more inclusive? Thinking about where and how it will take place. Again, just thinking about different people's preferences around, discussing and thinking time. Could you do it over multiple sessions that are more bite-sized rather than one big, large meeting? And I guess the biggest question of all is, do you really need the meeting? I think we've all been sat on these Teams calls where we're kind of thinking this could have been dealt with over an email or a quick phone call, etc. So really just ask yourself actually if you need a meeting at all. And when you're having the meetings, if you're booking them or if it's with your team, think about inviting a range of people. So just making sure you get a fully inclusive idea for ideas and suggestions, and taking into account everybody on your team. Making sure you clarify the purpose. So if you're leading that meeting, make sure the purpose is absolutely clear. Circulate information in advance is absolutely key. Setting out guidelines for behaviour. So I would say when you're circulating the information in advance, putting the guidelines for behaviour prior to that really just helps people stay on track with what you're trying to achieve in those meetings. Keeping control of the conversation, ensuring that people have got adequate time to speak and that everybody's having an equitable amount of involvement is really key. So just making sure you've got that onerous. And then follow up afterwards with action points is also really key for those people that like to have detail and, they like to do reading. So how do we broaden our impact is the biggest question. Again, let's think about our language. We tend to use gender quite a lot still. So in terms of making terms masculine and feminine. So can we kind of remove that in terms of speaking to the wider audience? Can we remove our jargon and business talk to just make it really simplistic and concise? Trying to remove slang and with business talk, acronyms, things that could get could confuse people or people could find difficult to interpret it. And idioms, this is something that's quite difficult if people are neurodivergent. It can be quite confusing. So again, just trying to keep the language as clear as possible. When you're thinking about your emails, thinking about structuring it to keep it to the point, be clear on the purpose. So be really clear on how you're going to title your emails. Don't just put in catch up or discussion or 5 minute thinking time. Be really clear on the purpose of what you're trying to achieve on that email. Bullet point summaries are absolutely key, especially with people maybe particularly with dyslexia or like to have just more of the highlights. I think bullet points really help in order to keep people on point. And then just state your tone, whether it's formal, informal, contributions, what you're hoping to achieve. So with the emails, just take a couple of those points forward to help broaden your impact. And then with websites, if anyone on here is in charge of their website or helps with marketing, clear headings, clear action tabs is key. Calls for action, so click here, go here, and think about the color combinations. We associate green with go and red with danger, but actually thinking about broadening the color scales, increasing imagery and transcripts and an audio over those images by a Control Alt is really good for those maybe that are visually impaired. So again, just making these small changes within your suggestions can really help broaden the impact. Active listening is something that we've talked about through all of these mini webinars, but this is really key. Being aware of others, demonstrating listening. So rather than writing notes down or not keeping eye contact or thinking about what you're going to say next, really be present in the moment of active listening. Repeating and clarifying is key, and asking lots of questions and leaving space for people to digest information. Okay, so let's make a change. We've talked about the methods, we've talked about why this is important, and we've talked about how we can broaden the impact. But let's make the change. So I guess, are we invested enough? Is this just good CPD, or do we really, really understand that the investment is absolutely key? So what does the FCA really want to see? So they want to see reasoning around decision making, detailed record keeping and communication, communication in line with culture, employees feeling empowered and safe to speak up, and management's being approachable and accountable. All these pieces of information are absolutely key as to why inclusive communication is top of the agenda. The former executive director of retail supervisions at the FCA noted in an interview recently that it's not just about generating an authentic purpose and a safe to speak up environment, but it's actually a listening up culture as well. So again, thinking about that in terms of your interactions with your peers and your colleagues and external stakeholders, really just making sure that you're representing that listening up culture is equally as important. Okay, so lastly, on to the action points that we can take away with us today. Firstly, recognize your unconscious bias decision making. Be really aware. We did a mini webinar on this before. This topic is a huge topic, but I would really encourage you to revisit that topic around challenging your assumptions and really just trying to train the mind to become completely open-minded, especially when you're going into communications. It's absolutely key. Secondly, utilize all effective methods of communication. If I bring you onto this next slide, we need to think about, the digital channels and tools you've got. So you've got everything at your fingertips: email, Teams, Slack, instant conversations, probably WhatsApp groups. Just think about all the tools you've got in terms of trying to just access the most, broaden the impact and the audience. Engage with your wider team, and then that leads really nicely into driving genuine dialogue. So try to encourage actual genuine dialogue where people care and are invested rather than, I guess, pre-ramble and sugar-coated conversations that aren't that meaningful. Thirdly, promote psychological safety. Again, did another mini webinar on this, and that links very nicely into the FCA point that we just covered off around being able to feel empowered and a speak up environment. Promote that psychological safety. So, again, please revisit those slides because this will all be helpful in terms of underpinning an inclusive communication strategy. Become solution driven. So I guess when you're going into conversations and you're trying to be as inclusive as you can, come with your own proactive, solution driven ideas. And that could be around any topic you want. But I think it's about being really pragmatic and being constructive rather than deconstructive in conversations. So just remember to always come with positive ideas, whether that's a very small idea or a very large idea that needs more input, but just try to always be solution driven. And then lastly, develop your employee voice and brand. So what do we mean by that? So what is your employee voice? So what does your psychological contract say about you and your role? So think about that engagement you've got with the business and your manager, and it's the unsaids and the psychological contract. What does that say about you and the culture of the business and the communication style? So take a moment to try to reflect on that and note some things down. I would definitely start to seek engagement surveys and discussions. So you may already do those, you may want them more frequently. You might just want some more data and MI from those. So again, pushing that in terms of driving the employee voice is absolutely key. And then, do you and your team feel heard, fully informed, and are you asking enough questions? So, whilst we like to always say communication could be better, again, being part of that solution-driven approach, are you asking enough questions? Are you being present enough in meetings, etc.? And are you using all your digital channels? So, again, just try to push yourself out of the comfort zone and think about personality types and processing styles and just broadening your impact. Okay, so hopefully that was a whistle-stop tour, but you should be able to now just summarize, the diverse audience that you'll be using and talking to over multiple methods. And you'll be able to also identify some strategies and communication techniques that could hopefully promote more of an inclusive and engaged dialogue. And then you'll be able to describe the impact that this has on your team, in terms of wider impact on psychological safety and assumptions and perspectives, and that will hopefully allow you to evolve in terms of your working style to become more agile to different teams. It was really lovely speaking with you today. If you've got any other questions, my details are on the slide. Thank you very much for listening.